The sound of the wind howling outside was the only music on Dr. Lívia Marchetti's Christmas Eve. She stood by the reception window, watching the snow fall so thick it looked like a white curtain, isolating the small rural clinic from the rest of the world. The lights on the Christmas tree in the corner of the room blinked in a slow, almost hypnotic rhythm, reflecting in her brown eyes. Lívia adjusted her white coat, a nervous habit she carried from her time working in big city hospitals. She could be at a party right now, wearing an elegant dress and toasting with friends. But she had chosen to be here, in the middle of nowhere, where the silence was louder than her thoughts. She sought peace for a silent night, but fate seemed to have very different plans. The clinic lights flickered as powerful headlights cut through the darkness of the storm. A black vehicle appeared in the snow, moving too fast for the road conditions, and braked sharply right in front of the glass door. Lívia ran to the counter, her medical instinct taking command instantly. Before she could reach the phone, the double entrance doors burst open, letting the freezing wind invade the heated room. And along with the snow, he entered. He was a tall man, with broad shoulders covered by a heavy coat. He looked like a wall, imposing and strong, but something was wrong. He walked with difficulty, hunched over as if protecting something precious against his chest. In his arms, wrapped in a thick blanket, was a small boy. "Help!" His voice was deep and hoarse, carried by an urgency that made the air feel heavier. "I need help." Lívia stopped for a second, impacted by his presence. Even visibly exhausted, he emanated a magnetic intensity that filled the entire room. When he lifted his face, his eyes met hers. They were dark, deep, and stormy, as if they had seen the worst of the world, but now silently implored for a miracle. "Bring him here, now," Lívia ordered, pointing to the triage stretcher. The authority in her voice made the stranger obey. He walked with effort, every step seeming like a battle, and deposited the boy with surprising delicacy onto the white sheets. He quickly explained that the boy, Noah, needed urgent medication to control his health condition. Lívia moved fast. Her hands, firm and precise, checked the boy's signs and administered what was necessary. While she worked to stabilize the little patient, she felt the weight of the man's gaze on her. He didn't watch the exits or the window, he looked only at her hands, as if they were the only anchor holding his world in place. When the monitor showed that Noah's signs were stable and color was returning to his cheeks, Lívia let out a sigh of relief. "He's going to be fine," she said, turning to the stranger. "He just needs to rest now." She expected him to relax, for the tension in his shoulders to lessen. Instead, he took a step back and leaned against the wall, his breathing heavy. His hand pressed tightly against his side, and Lívia noticed a dark, wet stain spreading across his shirt, just above his belt. "You're hurt," she stated, taking a step toward him. He raised his other hand in a gesture for her to stop. "I'm fine. Just take care of the boy." "I am the doctor here," Lívia retorted, closing the distance between them. "And I say you are not fine." Now close to him, she could feel the feverish heat emanating from his body, mixed with the smell of snow and something rustic, dangerous. Lívia reached out and touched his hand, the one pressing the wound. His skin was freezing from the storm, but the touch sent an electric current through her arm, a thermal shock that made her shiver. He looked down to where her delicate hand covered his, large and calloused. For a brief moment, the mask of coldness fell, revealing a man who looked lost. He tried to push her hand away, revealing that the injury was serious. It wasn't simple, it was the mark of violence that didn't belong in that quiet place. Lívia looked up at him again, her brown eyes fixed on his. Her heart beat fast, not from fear, but from an adrenaline she hadn't felt in a long time. "You should keep your distance, doctor," he whispered, his voice weak but still intense. "Today is Christmas Eve," she replied, holding his gaze firmly. "No one goes without care in my clinic." A slight smile, almost imperceptible, touched the man's lips. It was a smile of respect, perhaps even admiration. He tried to take a step forward, but his strength finally failed. Lívia moved quickly, wrapping her arm around his waist to support him before he fell. His weight was crushing, but she held firm. His face was inches from hers, and she could feel his breath, irregular and hot, against her neck. "Thank you," he whispered close to her ear, his voice loaded with exhausted gratitude. He slumped in her arms, consciousness finally defeated by fatigue. Lívia held him with all the strength she had, sliding with him to the floor, cradling his head in her lap. The world outside was just ice and howling wind, but inside, holding this mysterious stranger who had fought so hard to save a child, Lívia felt a different heat ignite in her chest. The storm outside might be dangerous, but the one starting inside that clinic promised to change her life forever. Lívia didn't have time to analyze the strange wave of heat that contact provoked. The man was unconscious, weighing on her like a marble statue. Her survival instinct, and his, depended entirely on her ability to act fast. With an effort that required every fiber of her muscles, she managed to maneuver him, dragging him partially until she could leverage his body onto the nearest trauma stretcher. Her breath came out in white clouds in the cold air that had entered with the storm. As soon as he was lying down, Lívia entered her operative mode. The world around disappeared. There was no more snow, no Christmas, no loneliness. There was only a critical patient and her hands trained to save him. She grabbed the medical scissors from her coat pocket. The cold metal touched his hot skin as she began to cut the thick fabric of his coat and the soaked shirt. As the layers of clothing gave way, his body was revealed. Lívia stopped for a fraction of a second, her eyes scanning his bare torso under the cold light of the emergency room. He was strong, defined like someone who sculpted their body not in a gym, but in the hardness of life. But what made Lívia's heart skip wasn't the muscles, but the marks. His chest and shoulders were a map of old battles. White scars, thin and old, crossed his olive skin, telling stories of survival that Lívia couldn't even imagine. However, the priority was the recent wound in his abdomen. It was serious, deep, but by a miracle, it seemed not to have hit any vital organs. "You're lucky, stranger," she whispered to herself, cleaning the area with methodical precision. "Very lucky." She turned to grab the local anesthetic. It was at that moment that he moved. It was a purely instinctive movement, born of years of defensive reflexes. Even half unconscious, his hand flew to his waist, fingers seeking something heavy and metallic clipped to his belt. Lívia didn't retreat. She didn't scream. Instead, with a calmness that would surprise her former colleagues in the big city, she placed her hand, small and gloved, firmly over his. "No," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried absolute authority. His eyes opened. They were clouded with pain, but focused on her with frightening intensity. He tensed his arm, fighting the fog of unconsciousness, trying to pull the metal object. "Let go," Lívia ordered, leaning over him. Their faces were so close she could see the small flecks of gold in his dark irises. "In this room, the only armed person is me. And my weapons are needles and scalpels. Let go of the metal." There was a moment of silent tension, where only the sound of the wind outside filled the space. He looked at her, evaluating her. He saw the determination in her delicate face, the firmness in her brown eyes. Slowly, his fingers relaxed. He let go of the gun. Lívia took it carefully, without breaking eye contact, and placed it on a metal tray out of his reach, on the other side of the room. "The boy," he murmured, his hoarse voice failing. "Noah is stable. He is sleeping on the other stretcher," Lívia assured, returning her attention to him. She prepared the suture needle. "Now, I need you to trust me. This is going to hurt, but I need to close this wound. We don't have time to wait for the anesthesia to take full effect." He nodded, clenching his teeth, and threw his head back onto the thin pillow. Lívia began to work. Her hands moved with the grace of a pianist. As she stitched his skin, she felt his muscles contract under her fingers with every touch of the needle. He made no sound, not even a moan, enduring the pain with a stoic control that was, at the same time, terrifying and admirable. To distract him, Lívia began to speak, her soft voice contrasting with the brutality of the moment. "I am Dr. Marchetti. Lívia. You are at the Pinewoods Clinic. The main road is blocked by snow, so I can't transfer you to the hospital right now. You're stuck with me." He opened his eyes again, watching her work. Sweat glistened on his forehead. "Roman," he said, with difficulty. "My name is Roman." "Well, Roman," she said, making the last stitch and cutting the thread. She took a clean gauze and pressed it gently over the dressing, her fingers lingering there, feeling the strong, rhythmic beat of his heart under her palm. "You survived." She looked up and found him watching her. There was something in that look now, without the barrier of acute pain. It was a look of recognition. Of curiosity. He looked at her not just as a doctor, but as a woman who had just disarmed and healed him without trembling. "You have hands of ice, doctor," he whispered, but it didn't sound like a criticism. It sounded like an intimate compliment. "It's necessary," she replied, feeling her face heat up. "If my hands trembled, I couldn't save anyone." She started to move away, feeling the air between them becoming too thin, too charged. But before she could take a step, Roman reached out and grabbed her wrist. His touch wasn't aggressive this time, it was a request. "They're coming," he said, urgency returning to his voice, breaking the moment of calm. "The lights flickered before I came in. They cut the power from the neighboring town. They are isolating the area." Lívia felt a shiver run down her spine, and it wasn't from the cold. "Who is coming, Roman?" "People who don't believe in medicine," he replied darkly. "You need to take Noah. There is a key in my pocket. Take my car. It's armored. Escape through the back. And leave you here?" Lívia pulled her wrist away, not to flee, but to cross her arms, indignant. "You just got 20 stitches. If you move, you'll open the wound. If I stay, I bring death to your door." He tried to sit up, groaning in pain. Lívia put her hands on his shoulders and pushed him firmly back onto the stretcher. "Death prowls my door every day, Roman. I beat it almost every time." She leaned in, her lips close to his ear, whispering with a ferocity that surprised them both. "No one dies on my Christmas shift. Not even you." Suddenly, the clinic plunged into total darkness. The hum of the heater stopped. The beep of the heart monitor silenced. The only sound was the wind outside, howling like a hungry wolf. Lívia stood motionless in the darkness, feeling Roman's hand find hers in the dark. His grip was warm, strong, and protective. "Too late," he said in the darkness. "They've arrived." The darkness that took over the clinic wasn't just the absence of light, it was a physical presence, heavy and suffocating. The only glow came from the pale reflection of the accumulated snow on the windows, casting ghostly shadows through the reception glass. Lívia felt Roman's grip on her hand tighten. It wasn't a grip of fear, but of command. Even wounded, even in the darkness, he assumed control of the space around them. "Get down," his voice was a breath of warm air against her face, so low it barely disturbed the silence. "The front glass, we are easy targets here." Lívia's medical instinct, trained for order and clarity, fought for a second against the chaos of the situation. But she felt the tension in Roman's body, the way he tried to place himself between her and the main entrance, even though he could barely stand. That awakened something in her, a fierce need to protect him back. "I know this building," she whispered, squeezing his hand back. I know every corner. Follow me. She guided his hand to her shoulder to support him. His weight on her was substantial, a constant reminder of his physical strength and his current vulnerability. Together, they moved as a single shadow, leaving the exposed reception and entering the inner hallway, where the concrete walls offered shelter. The first stop was the stretcher where Noah slept. The boy didn't even stir, his chest rising and falling in a calm rhythm, oblivious to the danger prowling outside. We need to take him to the stockroom, Lívia instructed, unlocking the stretcher wheels with a soft click. It has no windows. It's the safest place. Roman nodded in the dim light, his pale face shining with sweat. He tried to help push the stretcher, but Lívia saw the grimace of pain he tried to hide. No, she stopped him, placing her hand on his chest. His heart beat strong and fast under her palm. Save your strength. You're going to need it. Let me be your legs now. She pushed the stretcher silently down the hall, with Roman following right behind, one hand on the wall for balance, the other pressing his fresh dressing. When they reached the stockroom and closed the heavy door, the darkness became total. The smell of alcohol, gauze, and medical supplies enveloped the room. It was Lívia's territory, and that made her feel a little more powerful. My gun, Roman said, his hoarse voice breaking the silence. You took it from me. Where is it? Lívia hesitated. The gun was on the metal tray in the trauma room, now on the other side of the hallway. It was left out there, she admitted. She heard Roman let out a frustrated sigh, a harsh sound in his throat. Stay here with the boy. Lock the door. I'll go get it. You can barely walk in a straight line, Roman. Lívia whispered, indignation mixed with concern. If you go out in that hallway and fall, you die. And if you die, who protects Noah? His silence was confirmation that she was right. I'll go, Lívia decided. Before he could protest, she continued. I know the floor, I know where the boards creak and where the furniture is. I'll go and come back before you count to 10. Roman moved in the darkness until his hands found her arms. He slid his hands up, holding her face between his large, warm palms. The touch was so intimate, so desperate, that Lívia felt the air escape her lungs. If you see a light out there, if you hear glass breaking, you run, he instructed, his thumbs caressing her cheekbones. Don't try to be a hero. Come back here and lock this door. Understood? Lívia nodded, unable to speak. His proximity was dizzying. In that pitch black, unable to see his face clearly, her other senses were on high alert. His scent, the roughness of his hands, the heat of his body radiating to hers. There was a silent promise between them, a pact sealed in the dark. She pulled away from his touch reluctantly and opened the door. The hallway was frighteningly quiet. Lívia walked barefoot to avoid making noise, her shoes abandoned in the stockroom. The cold linoleum floor chilled the soles of her feet. She reached the trauma room. The metal tray gleamed faintly with the moonlight coming through the high window. The gun was there. Cold, heavy, lethal. An object that went against everything she had sworn as a doctor. Lívia reached out. Her fingers grazed the cold metal. Crack. The sound came from the reception. It wasn't glass breaking, it was the unmistakable sound of the front door handle being forced. Lívia's heart stopped. A beam of light from a flashlight cut through the reception, sweeping the counter, the empty chairs, approaching the hallway where she was. She grabbed the gun. The weight was strange in her hand. She turned to go back, but the flashlight beam was sweeping the floor, approaching fast. If she ran, she would be seen. Suddenly, a strong hand emerged from the shadow behind her, covering her mouth and pulling her backward, into a small linen closet. Lívia almost screamed, but the familiar scent of leather and snow invaded her. It was Roman. He had followed her. He pressed her against the back wall of the closet, his body covering hers completely, protecting her. He closed the closet door, leaving only a tiny crack open. They were squeezed into the tiny space, surrounded by sheets and towels. His chest was glued to hers. Lívia could feel every beat of his heart against her own chest, in a frantic rhythm mirroring hers. The light of the intruder's flashlight passed through the crack in the door, illuminating a thin line across Roman's eyes. He didn't blink. He was looking at Lívia. His hand, which had covered her mouth, slid gently to her neck, his thumb resting over the racing pulse in her throat. He lowered his head slowly, his lips grazing her ear. "Shh," he whispered, so low it was just a vibration against her skin. "I'm with you. Nobody touches you." Lívia closed her eyes, trembling. In that moment, with danger meters away, the only thing she could feel was the overwhelming electricity between his body and hers. She raised her free hand and held his shirt, pulling him imperceptibly closer, surrendering her safety, and perhaps her heart, into the hands of that dangerous stranger. Time seemed to have dissolved inside that tight closet. Lívia's entire world now came down to millimeters, the tiny distance between her lips and the skin of Roman's neck. Outside, heavy steps made the wooden floor of the hallway creak. Every noise was a threat, a reminder that violence had invaded her sanctuary of healing. But, inside there, surrounded by piles of white sheets and the feverish heat of Roman's body, Lívia's fear began to transform into something else. Roman was heavy, solid. Even wounded, he kept her pressed against the back wall, using his own body as a human shield. If the intruder fired at the door, the bullet would hit Roman first. He knew that. Lívia knew that. And the understanding of that silent sacrifice made her chest tighten. The flashlight beam swept the crack in the door once more, illuminating Roman's profile for a second. He was pale, a thin layer of sweat covering his forehead. His eyes were closed, and his jaw locked so tight a muscle jumped in his cheek. He was in pain, excruciating pain, but he didn't move a single muscle so as not to give away their position. The intruder's radio crackled outside, a static and harsh sound that made Lívia shiver. "Reception clear," said a male voice, cold and professional. "Advancing to the back offices." The steps resumed, moving slowly away toward the opposite wing of the clinic. Roman released the breath he had been holding, but didn't move. He opened his eyes and looked down, meeting Lívia's gaze in the dim light. "He's not alone," Roman whispered, his rough voice grazing her face. "If he's reporting, there are others out there." "We have the gun now," Lívia whispered back, raising the hand where the cold metal of the pistol was still tight between her trembling fingers. Roman looked at the gun in her hand, then looked back into her eyes. He raised his hand and, with a delicacy that contradicted his size, wrapped his fingers over hers on the gun, adjusting her grip. "I hope you never have to use it, Doctor," he said. "But if you need to, don't hesitate." Lívia felt the warmth of his hand over hers, guiding her, protecting her even from the responsibility of that lethal object. "We need to get back to Noah," she said, feeling his body becoming heavier against hers. The adrenaline was fading, and the reality of his injury was taking its toll. "Wait," Roman asked. He leaned his forehead against hers, closing his eyes again. He was trembling slightly. Just a second. Lívia realized then how hot he was. The fever was rising fast, a furious response of the body to trauma and impending infection. "You're burning up," she murmured, medical concern replacing fear. Without thinking, she raised her free hand and touched his face, her cold fingers caressing the hot, rough skin of his stubble. The touch seemed to anchor him. Roman turned his face slightly, pressing his cheek against her palm, seeking the relief of that coolness. It was a gesture of such pure vulnerability that it disarmed Lívia completely. There was no mafia cleaner there, nor the tough surgeon. There was just a wounded man seeking comfort and the only person capable of saving him. "Your hands," he murmured again, as if he were slightly delirious. "They calm the noise." Lívia felt her heart skip a beat. "Come on, Roman. Lean on me." They left the closet carefully. The hallway was empty again, but the shadow of danger still hung in the air. Lívia put his arm over her shoulders, taking almost his entire weight. They moved like a two-headed creature, stumbling silently back to the relative safety of the stockroom. As soon as they entered and Lívia locked the door, Roman slid down the wall to the floor, unable to stand for another second. Noah still slept deeply on the improvised stretcher atop supply boxes. Lívia knelt beside Roman. In the almost total darkness of the stockroom, she fumbled until she found the emergency lantern and turned it on, covering the beam of light with her hand to create only a diffuse glow, not visible from outside. The soft light illuminated Roman's face. He was pale, his lips losing color. The abdominal dressing was stained with fresh red. The effort had taken its price. "You opened the stitches," Lívia stated, frustration evident in her voice, but her hands were already working, checking his pulse, which was rapid and weak. "It was worth it." Roman tried to smile, but it came out as a grimace. "You are safe." "No one is safe yet," she retorted, tearing open a package of gauze. "You are going into septic shock, Roman. I need to lower your temperature and stop this, or you won't see Christmas dawn." He grabbed her wrist, stopping her. His strength was waning, but his gaze was intense. "If they get in here..." He looked at Noah, then at her. "You hand over the boy. And say I kidnapped him. Say I forced you to help. You save yourself, Lívia. Promise." Lívia looked at him, incredulous. Even on the verge of collapse, he was planning how to save her life at the cost of his own honor. She pulled her wrist from his grip and, on an impulse that surprised them both, held his face with both hands, forcing him to look at her. "I don't make deals with death, Roman. And I don't abandon my patients." She leaned closer, their noses almost touching in the dim lantern light. "We are getting out of this. The three of us. Together." Roman looked at her lips, then her eyes. There was a promise there, something that went beyond medical duty. "You are stubborn, doctor," he whispered, resistance finally breaking. "You have no idea," Lívia replied. And in the gloom of that cold room, while the wind howled outside trying to knock down the walls, Lívia began to fight for his life once more, knowing that if she lost that battle, she would lose something she didn't even know she was looking for until he walked through that door. The silence inside the stockroom was broken only by Roman's irregular breathing. Lívia worked quickly under the diffuse light of the lantern, her precise movements hiding the internal tremor that threatened to dominate her. She found the vial of antibiotics on the metal shelf. She prepared the syringe with mechanical efficiency, but when she turned to Roman, the professional mask fell for an instant. He was struggling to keep his eyes open, the fever painting an unnatural flush on his cheekbones, contrasting with the pallor of his lips. "This will help with the infection," she whispered, kneeling beside him. Roman didn't look at the needle. He looked at her. "You're good at this," he murmured, his voice slurred. "Keeping calm when the world is collapsing." "It's my job," Lívia replied, administering the medication. "But usually the world doesn't collapse with armed men in my hallway." She finished the procedure and began to change the abdominal dressing. Her touch was light, almost a caress, trying not to cause more pain than necessary. Roman hissed through his teeth when she pressed the clean gauze, and instinctively, his hand flew to hold hers. For a moment, they remained frozen in that position. His large hand wrapping her delicate one over his chest. Lívia could feel the strong beat of his heart reverberating through her palm. It was a rhythm of life, stubborn and strong. Why the boy? Lívia asked suddenly, needing to break the electric tension forming between them. Why risk your life, betray those people, for a child? Roman released her hand slowly, letting his head fall back against the cold wall. He looked at the dark ceiling, as if seeing memories projected in the shadows. Noah is innocent, he said, his voice gaining a somber gravity. In my world, innocence is the first thing that dies. I spent my life cleaning up other men's messes, Lívia. I did things I'm not proud of to survive. But when they ordered the boy to be removed because he was a loose end, he turned his face to face her. I looked at him and saw the only chance I would have to do something clean. Something right. If I die tonight, but he lives, my debt will be paid. Lívia felt a lump in her throat. She always saw the world in black and white, doctors save, criminals hurt. But Roman was a living contradiction. A man capable of extreme violence to protect something pure. No one is going to die tonight, she said, with fierce determination. Your debt won't be paid with your life, Roman. Not if I can help it. Suddenly, the sound of the doorknob turning made them both stop. It was a metallic sound, slow and deliberate. Click. Click. Someone was testing the door. Lívia turned off the lantern immediately, plunging them into total darkness. She felt Roman try to stand up, his body tense like a violin string about to snap, but he had no strength. He let out a muffled groan of frustration. Stay down, Lívia whispered, the command coming out more authoritative than she imagined herself capable of. Outside, a dull thud. A shoulder hitting the wood. The door shuddered, but the lock held. It's locked, a muffled voice said from the hallway. Bring the crowbar. We're breaking it down. Heavy steps moved away. They had gained a few minutes. Maybe 5. Maybe 10. Lívia turned on the lantern again, but now her focus had shifted. Fear had turned into cold, calculating focus. She looked at the shelves around them. Bottles of alcohol, cleaning products, oxygen cylinders, scalpels. They'll be back, Roman said, trying to pull the gun that was beside him on the floor. Give me the gun, Lívia. I can hold the door. You can barely hold your head up, Roman, she retorted. She stood up, walking to the shelves. We aren't going to win this with brute force. They have numbers, they have weapons, and they have health. We have something else. What? Roman watched her, confused. Lívia grabbed 2 large bottles of 70% alcohol and a box of glass ampoules. She turned to him, and the lantern light illuminated a dangerous glint in her brown eyes. Chemistry, she said. And the element of surprise. She began to pour the alcohol on the floor, right at the door entrance, creating a slippery and flammable puddle. If they come in, she explained quickly, working with the efficiency of someone preparing a surgical table, the first one will slip. The second one will hesitate. And that's where we gain the advantage. Roman watched her transformation with a mix of shock and admiration. The doctor who minutes before spoke of saving lives was now turning her clinic into a tactical trap. Doctor. He called, his hoarse voice full of something that looked like reverence. Lívia stopped and looked at him. What? Remind me never to get you mad at me when this is all over. A nervous, but genuine smile escaped Lívia's lips. Survive the night, Roman. Then we'll decide who should be afraid of whom. She approached him again, crouching down. Adrenaline was pulsing through her, making her hands shake slightly now. I need you to protect Noah, she said, handing the gun to him. If they get past the door, if they get past me. They won't get past you, Roman held the hand offering the gun, pulling her close until their faces were millimeters apart. His heat was enveloping. "Because I will be between them and you until my last breath." His gaze fell to her mouth. Desire, raw and untimely, surged between them in the midst of danger, as undeniable as the storm outside. "Roman," she whispered, his name sounding like a prayer and a warning. "Go," he said, releasing her hand reluctantly. "Prepare your trap, Doctor. Let's show them they picked the wrong clinic to invade." Lívia nodded, her heart racing in her chest. She turned to the door, ready to transform her sanctuary of healing into a fortress of glass and fire. The sound of metal tearing would echo like thunder inside the small stockroom. Kryriak. Lívia instinctively shrank against the metal shelves, smelling the acrid scent of the alcohol she had spilled on the floor mixing with the dust of splintered wood. Across the room, in the dim light, Roman sat on the floor, leaning against Noah's stretcher. The gun was raised in his trembling hands, but his eyes were focused on the door with lethal clarity. 1. Roman counted, whispering, anticipating the enemy's movement. 2. The door gave way with a final crash, flying open inward. The beam of a tactical flashlight cut through the darkness, blind and invasive. A bulky silhouette advanced into the room with arrogant confidence. "Found you," the man growled, taking the first step inside. But his confidence lasted exactly 1 second. The intruder's heavy boot hit the puddle of alcohol and disinfectant Lívia had prepared. Friction disappeared. The man lost his balance in an almost comical way. If the situation weren't deadly, his feet flew up and he fell on his back with a dull, painful thud that made the shelves vibrate. The air escaped the man's lungs with the impact, the flashlight flying from his hand and spinning on the floor, creating a carousel of light and shadow on the walls. "Now!" Roman shouted, his hoarse voice cutting through the chaos. Lívia didn't hesitate. She stepped out of the shadows behind the door, holding the heavy fire extinguisher she had taken from the wall. She didn't use it to hit. She pulled the pin and aimed the nozzle directly at the face of the second man trying to enter behind the first. With a deafening hiss, a thick white cloud of chemical powder was fired. The second intruder screamed, choking and covering his eyes as the cloud blinded and suffocated him instantly. He retreated into the hallway, coughing violently, unable to breathe or see. The first man, the one who had fallen, tried to get up, dizzy from the impact of the fall. He fumbled at his waist for his gun. Roman adjusted his aim. His hands trembled from the fever, but his finger on the trigger was steady. "Don't move," Roman warned. The sound of the gun hammer being cocked was audible even over the coughing of the man in the hallway. The intruder on the floor stopped, looking at the dark barrel pointed at his chest. He looked at Roman, wounded and bleeding, and then at Lívia, who stood above him like an avenging angel wrapped in white mist, holding the extinguisher like a weapon of war. "You're dead," the man on the floor hissed, but he raised his hands slowly. "Maybe," Roman replied, his voice cold as the ice outside. "But you go first if you try to get up." Lívia seized the hesitation. She ran to the door and slammed it shut with all her might, locking it again and pushing a heavy metal cabinet in front of it, barricading the entrance. From the hallway, the second man could still be heard coughing and cursing, retreating away from the chemical cloud. Silence returned to the room, but now it was an electric silence, charged with pure adrenaline. Lívia dropped the extinguisher, her hands shaking violently now that the action had passed. She slid down to the floor, her back against the cabinet serving as a barricade, her chest rising and falling in rapid gasps. Roman lowered the gun slowly, letting out a long, painful sigh. He looked at her across the room poorly lit by the fallen flashlight. "You," Roman began, then shook his head, an incredulous smile curving his pale lips. "A fire extinguisher? Seriously?" Lívia looked up, meeting his gaze. Despite the fear, despite the mortal danger banging at the door, she felt nervous laughter bubbling in her throat. I said I would use chemistry, she retorted, her voice faltering a little. Dry chemical powder. Efficient for blinding and causing temporary asphyxiation. Roman laughed, a low, hoarse sound that soon turned into a cough of pain. He held his abdomen, squeezing his eyes shut. Lívia was at his side in an instant, crossing the small room on her knees. Let me see, she asked, hands already checking the dressing. It had leaked a little more, but hadn't ruptured completely. I'm fine, he lied, opening his eyes to face her. Thanks to you. He raised his free hand and, with a hesitant gesture, touched a lock of hair that had escaped Livia's ponytail and fallen over her face. He tucked the hair behind her ear, fingers grazing the sensitive skin of her neck. I've never seen anything like it, he whispered, the admiration in his voice warming Lívia more than any bonfire could. You didn't freeze. You fought. I was terrified, Lívia admitted, leaning unconsciously into his touch. Fear doesn't matter. It matters what you do with it, Roman said. His thumb caressed her cheek, wiping a smudge of white powder from the extinguisher. And you, Dr. Marchetti, you are a warrior. Lívia looked at his mouth, then his eyes. The proximity was intoxicating. They had just repelled an attack, had acted as a perfect unit, without needing words. The trust that took years to build had been forged between them in a matter of minutes. They'll be back, she whispered, though she didn't want to break the moment. And they'll be back angrier. Let them come, Roman replied, without looking away from her lips. As long as I breathe, they don't get past that barricade. He leaned forward, his forehead touching hers. Lívia closed her eyes, absorbing his strength, allowing herself, for just a second, to forget they were a doctor and a criminal, and be just a woman and a man surviving the storm together. What do we do now? She asked, her voice a thread. Now. Roman breathed deeply, intoxicated by her scent even in that chaotic place. Now we wait for the next move. And we pray for the storm outside to get worse, because the more snow falls, the harder it will be for them to get to us. Lívia nodded, pulling away slowly, though every cell in her body wanted to stay there, nestled in his dangerous protection. She looked at Noah, who stirred on the stretcher, murmuring in his sleep induced by exhaustion. They had won the first battle. But the war for survival on that Christmas night was far from over. Adrenaline is a powerful drug, but ephemeral. When it goes away, it leaves behind a cold void and exhaustion. In the small stockroom turned trench, silence returned, but now it felt heavier. Lívia felt her hands shake, a delayed reaction to the confrontation. She looked at the door barricaded with the metal cabinet. It seemed safe for now, but the sound of the wind howling outside reminded her that the storm was still the master of the night. She turned to Roman. The man who, minutes before, held a gun with lethal determination, was now leaning his head against the wall, eyes closed, breath coming in short, difficult rasps. Lívia approached him, kneeling on the cold floor. The lantern light cast long shadows over his face. Roman, she called softly. He opened his eyes with effort. They were glazed, too bright. The fever had arrived with full force, a violent response of the body to infection and trauma. Still, here, he murmured, a weak smile trying to curve his lips. Lívia took off her glove and placed her hand on his forehead. It was burning. But when she touched his arm, she realized he was shivering. A fine, uncontrollable tremor that ran through his broad shoulders. You're burning up with fever, but feeling cold, she diagnosed, voice laden with concern. The central heating turned off when they cut the power. The temperature in here is dropping fast. I can take it, Roman lied, his teeth chattering slightly. Take care of Noah. Noah is wrapped in 3 thermal blankets. He's warmer than both of us put together, Lívia retorted. She looked around, evaluating the scarce resources. There were no extra blankets. There were no portable heaters. She looked at Roman again. The cleaner, the feared man, suddenly seemed human. Vulnerable. And that made something tighten in Livia's chest. Without saying a word, she stood up and walked to the uniform shelf. She grabbed 2 clean, thick lab coats, but knew it wouldn't be enough. She returned to where Roman sat and sat down beside him, shoulder to shoulder. "What are you doing?" he asked, turning his head slowly to look at her. "Hypothermia is a real threat now, just as much as the men outside," Lívia explained, arranging the coats over his chest like an improvised blanket. "We need to conserve heat." She hesitated for a second, medical protocol fighting against something more primitive and instinctive. Then, she slid her arm under his arm and nestled against the side of his body that wasn't wounded. Roman tensed at first, surprised by the proximity. "Doctor. I am dangerous. You shouldn't be so close. I dirted everything I touched in my life." "Shut up, Roman," she whispered, resting her head on his shoulder. "You saved a boy today. And you saved me. If that is being dirty, then the whole world needs a bath, not you." Gradually, Roman relaxed. He let out a long, heavy sigh, and his head hung to the side, resting gently on top of hers. His feverish heat radiated to Livia's cold body, and her coolness seemed to soothe his burning skin. "You smell like antiseptic and vanilla," he murmured, his voice groggy, almost daydreaming. "It's the best smell I've ever smelled." Lívia smiled in the gloom, closing her eyes. "It's just cheap clinic soap." "No," he insisted, his hand seeking hers in the dark, intertwining fingers firmly. "It's the smell of peace. I haven't had peace in a long time, Lívia." The use of her name, without the title of doctor, sounded like a caress. "Why did you run from the big city?" he asked after a while, his voice getting lower. "A surgeon like you should be in a glass palace, saving presidents, not hidden in the snow." Lívia squeezed his hand. It was the first time anyone had asked that, and she felt like answering with the truth. "I lost someone on the operating table," she confessed, voice choked. "A girl. Noah's age. I did everything right. Followed all protocols. But her heart stopped in my hands, that never trembled, couldn't bring her back. I thought I had lost the gift. I thought I didn't deserve to have anyone's life under my responsibility anymore." Roman was silent for a moment, absorbing her pain. Then, he squeezed her hand tightly, bringing it to his lips. He kissed her knuckles, a gesture of absolute reverence. "You didn't lose anything," he said, with fierce conviction. "Tonight, you stitched me up when I wanted to give up. You fought armed men with cleaning products. You saved Noah. Maybe you aren't God, Lívia. But you are the guardian angel we needed." Lívia raised her face, meeting his eyes in the darkness. They shone, not just from fever, but from raw, honest emotion. "Roman. Don't hide anymore," he asked, hand moving up to touch her face, thumb tracing her jawline. "The world needs your hands. I need them." The distance between them vanished. There was no rush, no desperate urgency. Just a magnetic attraction, inevitable as gravity. Lívia leaned in and Roman lowered his head. When his lips touched hers, it was soft. Hesitant. A shocking contrast to the violence of the night. His lips were hot and dry from fever, but the kiss was tender, laden with a silent promise. It was a kiss of comfort, of recognition, of 2 broken souls finding their missing pieces in the midst of chaos. Lívia responded, her hand moving up to the nape of his neck, fingers getting lost in his short, sweat-damp hair. For that brief moment, the cold disappeared. The fear disappeared. There was only Roman and the beat of his heart against hers. He pulled away slowly, resting his forehead on hers again, both breathing heavily. "If we get out of here alive," Roman whispered, "I won't let you hide again." "Then make sure we get out," Lívia replied, heart full of new courage. "Rest now. I'll watch the door." Roman nodded, exhaustion finally conquering his iron will. He kept her hand trapped in his, like an anchor, and let his eyes close. Lívia stayed awake in the darkness, listening to his breathing regulate, feeling the warmth of his hand in hers. She knew the final battle was yet to come, but for the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. She had someone to fight for. The calm that followed the kiss didn't last long. It lasted just long enough for both their breathing to settle and the shared warmth to relieve the biting cold of the unheated room. Roman woke suddenly, not with a start, but with immediate tension, like an animal sensing a change in the wind direction. He moved slightly away from Lívia, eyes sweeping the darkness, hand seeking the gun on the floor instinctively. "What is it?" Lívia whispered, missing his warmth immediately. "It's too quiet," Roman replied, voice raspy. "They stopped trying the door. Stopped walking in the hallway." "Maybe they gave up because of the snow," Lívia suggested, hopeful. "The storm got worse. I hear the wind hitting the front windows." Roman shook his head negatively in the dim light. "Men like these don't give up because of bad weather, Lívia. They are paid to finish the job. If they stopped making noise, it's because they changed tactics. They are communicating by radio, coordinating. They are surrounding the perimeter." He tried to stand up. The movement was painful. Lívia saw the grimace he tried to hide when his abdominal muscles contracted. The dark stain on his dressing had grown slightly, a worrying sign that the previous exertion had taken its toll. "You shouldn't move." Lívia stood up too, reaching out to support him, but he held her wrists gently, stopping her. "We need to leave this room," he said, serious. "The stockroom is a trap. It only has one exit. If they decide to set fire to the building or use gas, we'll be cornered here like rats." The mention of fire made Livia's stomach turn. She looked at Noah, who was still sleeping soundly, his serene face lit by the faint lantern light. "Where do we go?" "The main hallway is watched." The back office, Roman visualized the clinic map in his tactical mind. "I saw it when we entered. It has a high window, one of those tilting ones, facing the forest, not the road. It's small, but you fit." Noah fits. Lívia felt a chill down her spine that had nothing to do with the room temperature. She understood immediately what he wasn't saying. "And you?" she asked, voice steady. "A man your size, with that injury, you won't fit through that window, Roman." He didn't look away. The brutal honesty was there, raw and painful. "I stay. I hold the position in the hallway. I draw their attention to the reception while you run for the tree line. My car is useless, but if you follow the north trail for 2 kilometers, you'll reach the ranger cabin. There is a radio there." "No," Lívia's refusal was immediate and absolute. "Lívia, listen." "No," she interrupted him, stepping forward, invading his personal space. "Do you think I am the type of person who runs and leaves the patient behind? Do you think I'm going to leave you to die alone in that cold hallway so I can save myself? It's not about you saving yourself." Roman held her shoulders, his strength returning with the urgency of the moment. "It's about the boy. I promised he would live. And it's about you, because, God help me, Lívia, the idea of them getting their hands on you terrifies me more than death." The intensity in his voice, the veiled confession that she already meant more to him than his own life, made Lívia's eyes water. But that only strengthened her resolve. "Noah comes with us. But we are not separating." She placed her hands over his, which were on her shoulders. "I know this place better than you. Better than them. There is a basement. Roman frowned. A basement? I didn't see any door. Because it's under the rug in the X-ray room, across the hall. It's where the old generator and reserve oxygen tanks are. There is a ventilation exit that leads behind the tool shed, out of sight from the main road. Roman's eyes narrowed, evaluating the new information. His tactical brain working fast. The X-ray room has lead-lined walls, he murmured. It's bulletproof. And if there is oxygen there, we can create a distraction, Lívia completed, understanding where his mind was going. A big distraction. Roman looked at her, a mix of pride and disbelief. You are dangerous, Doctor. I am learning from the best, she retorted. Roman released her shoulders and stroked her face briefly. The touch was a silent farewell to the moment of peace and preparation for the war to come. All right. Let's go to the basement. But we have to cross the hallway. If they are there. We'll be quick, Lívia said. She went to the stretcher and began to wake Noah gently. Noah, honey. We need to play spies again. Remember? Total silence. The boy opened his eyes, sleepy, but fear stayed far from his face when he saw Roman standing, vigilant. Is Uncle Roman going to protect us? The boy asked. Roman crouched, ignoring the sharp pain in his abdomen, to be at eye level with the child. Always, kid. But today, Dr. Lívia is the captain. Let's do what she says. Understood? Noah nodded solemnly. Roman stood up and looked at Lívia. He checked the gun one last time. Few rounds remained. You take the boy. I'll go in front. On my signal, you run for the X-ray room and don't look back. Lívia picked Noah up. He was heavy, but adrenaline made her strong. She positioned herself behind Roman at the barricaded door. Ready? He asked, hand on the improvised barricade. Ready, she replied, though her heart was beating so hard it hurt. Roman pushed the metal cabinet with a grunt of effort, clearing the way to the dark hallway. The sound of metal dragging on the floor seemed like a scream in the silence of the clinic. They stepped out into the darkness of the hallway. And that was when they heard it. Not shots, nor screams. But the unmistakable sound of glass shattering on the ceiling, followed by a dull thud. There on the roof, Roman whispered, spinning his body to protect Lívia and Noah. They're coming from above. The trap was closing, and their time had just run out. The ceiling of the hallway exploded in a shower of plaster and cold dust. Lívia felt the impact before she even heard the sound. Pieces of insulation fell like dirty snow around them. Above, through the hole opened in the structure, the beam of a tactical flashlight cut the darkness, sweeping the hallway like the eye of a predator. Run! Roman shouted, pushing Lívia from behind with his free hand. She didn't hesitate. With Noah held firmly in her arms, she sprinted toward the X-ray room door, just 5 meters away. It felt like a marathon. The floor was slippery with debris, and the boy's weight, added to the terror, made her lungs burn. Behind her, the heavy sound of boots landing on the hallway floor was heard. One of the invaders had dropped down. Freeze! A voice shouted behind them. Lívia didn't stop. She reached the X-ray room handle, turned it, and threw herself inside, skidding on the linoleum floor. She put Noah on the floor behind a lead cabinet and turned immediately. Roman wasn't there. He was standing at the entrance, using the doorframe as cover. He turned to the hallway, gun raised. 2 deafening shots echoed in the confined space. They weren't shots to kill, but to suppress. The intruder in the hallway dived for cover. Roman! Lívia screamed, reaching out. Roman stumbled back into the room. He slammed his shoulder against the heavy, lead-lined door, and pushed it with all his body weight to close it. Lívia ran to help him. Together, they slammed the door and turned the thick lock. A second later, dull thuds against the door metal were heard. Bullets trying to get through. But the lead door, designed to contain radiation, held firm. Silence returned inside the room, interrupted only by the panting breath of the three. Roman slid down the door backwards to the floor, letting the gun fall to his side. His face was gray, covered in white dust from the ceiling. Lead walls. He whispered, trying to draw breath. You were right. They won't be able to shoot through this. Lívia knelt beside him, hands shaking as she checked his pulse. It was erratic. The extreme physical exertion was taking too high a toll. They're going to try to break it down, Lívia said, looking at the door vibrating with kicks from the outside. We don't have much time. Where is the rug? She looked around frantically until she saw the thick industrial rug in the corner of the room, under the exam table. Noah, help Aunt Lívia, she called. The boy, scared but brave, ran to help. Together, they pulled the heavy rug, revealing an old wooden trapdoor in the concrete floor. Lívia pulled the iron ring. The wood groaned but gave way, revealing a narrow ladder descending into the total darkness of the basement. The smell of damp earth and oil rose to meet them. Noah first, Lívia ordered. Go down slowly, honey. Hold tight to the steps. The boy descended, disappearing into the shadow. Lívia turned to Roman. He was trying to stand, but his legs wouldn't obey. I stay, he said, his voice failing. I hold the door from the inside. If I go down, I won't be able to climb back up. I'll be dead weight. You are not a weight, Lívia grabbed his shirt collar, pulling him close with a strength born of desperation. You are my partner. And partners don't get left behind. Now get up, Roman. Something in the ferocity of her eyes made him find a reserve of energy he didn't know he had. He clenched his teeth, grunted in pain, and forced his body to obey. With Lívia's arm around his waist, he limped to the trapdoor opening. I'll help you, she said. Lean on me. The descent was a slow nightmare. Every step was agony for Roman, and Lívia had to hold his weight so he wouldn't fall. When they finally touched the packed earth floor of the basement, Roman collapsed. Lívia looked up. The X-ray room door upstairs was starting to give way under the blows of a sledgehammer or something heavy. She climbed a few steps quickly and closed the wooden trapdoor above them, plunging them into absolute darkness. She fumbled until she found the internal latch of the trapdoor and slid it. Now, they were buried. Lívia climbed down the ladder feeling her way and turned on the small pocket flashlight she still had in her coat. The beam of light revealed a tight space, full of old boxes, the silent generator, and dusty oxygen tanks. Roman was sitting on the floor, leaning against a tank, head hung back. Noah was hugging his arm, crying silently. Lívia approached and sat on Roman's other side, pulling Noah onto her lap to calm him, but keeping a hand on Roman's knee. We are safe, she whispered, though the muffled sound of footsteps upstairs said otherwise. They don't know about the basement. They'll think we jumped out the window, like you suggested before. Roman turned his head to look at her. In that tiny, cold space, the intimacy was suffocating. You're crazy, he murmured, but there was a faint smile on his lips. You could have escaped. You could have left me upstairs as a distraction. I already said, Lívia replied, intertwining her fingers with his. Medical code of honor. We don't abandon anyone. Roman squeezed her hand. Fever made his skin burn against hers, but the grip was firm. It's not just medical code, Lívia, he said, dark eyes fixed on hers, shining in the dim light. You didn't do this just because you're a doctor. Lívia felt her face heat up. He was right. It wasn't just about medicine anymore. It was about him. About the way he looked at her, as if she were the only light in a world of shadows. No, she admitted, voice a hoarse whisper. I didn't. Roman raised a trembling hand and touched her face, wiping a smudge of dust from her cheek. When we get out of here. He began, but a cough interrupted him. Shoo. Lívia put a finger to his lips. Save your promises for when we see the sun, Roman. Now, just breathe. I am here. And in the dark, under the floor of the invaded clinic, they stayed there, the three of them, in a tense and shared silence, listening to the hunter's steps above their heads, hoping the darkness would be enough to hide them until dawn. Above their heads, the world was being destroyed. The sound of furniture being dragged and cabinets being knocked over in the X-ray room reverberated through the floorboards above the basement, causing dust to fall on the three fugitives hidden in the darkness. They know we didn't go out the window, Roman whispered. He was leaning against a cold metal cylinder, breathing short and shallow. They didn't see footprints in the snow outside. It's a matter of time before they lift the rug. Lívia looked at the wooden ceiling. The trapdoor was locked from the inside, but an old iron latch wouldn't hold determined men for long. She looked around the tight basement, illuminating the shadows with her weak flashlight. The beam of light revealed the old diesel generator, covered in cobwebs, and a row of tall green tanks leaning against the back wall. Oxygen, Lívia said, a dangerous idea forming in her mind. She stood up, leaving Noah safe in a corner protected by boxes. She walked to the tanks. They were old, emergency reserves from when the clinic was built, but the gauges indicated they were still full. What are you thinking? Roman asked, watching her with difficulty. Pure oxygen isn't flammable by itself, Lívia explained, turning the valve of one of the tanks. A sharp hiss filled the silence, like a snake waking up. But it is a violent combustion accelerator. If we saturate this environment with oxygen, any minimal spark will turn this basement into a bomb. Roman's eyes widened. He understood immediately. You want to blow the floor out from under them. I want to create a distraction big enough to cover our escape, Lívia corrected. She pointed the flashlight to the opposite corner, where a rusty metal grate covered a square opening in the wall, flush with the ground. Ventilation. Leads behind the shed, like I said. Roman looked at the narrow grate. Noah fits. You fit. But I. He shook his head, looking at his broad shoulders and then at the wound in his abdomen. I won't be able to drag myself through there, Lívia. I'll get stuck. Lívia knelt in front of him, holding his face with both hands, forcing him to look at her. Fever made his skin glisten with sweat, but the determination in his dark eyes was still there. Then we push. We pull. We find a way. But you are not staying. Lívia, be rational. If I stay, I can manually trigger the trap when they open the trapdoor. I can guarantee you escape. No. Her whisper was fierce. I didn't save your life 3 times today for you to waste it now. You told me I was your partner. Partners don't sacrifice themselves, they survive together. She leaned in and kissed him, a quick and desperate kiss, sealing the deal. Now help me. I need a spark. Roman looked at her, defeated by her stubbornness, and, he had to admit, in love with her. He fumbled in his coat pocket and pulled out a silver metal lighter. The generator, he indicated, pointing to the old machine. It has exposed wiring. If you let the oxygen leak and put the lighter near the wiring with a slow fuse. A tourniquet, Lívia said, taking the rubber band from her pocket. Rubber burns slow and smells strong, but it will give us time. They worked together at a frantic pace. Lívia opened the valves of 3 oxygen tanks. The hiss of escaping gas became a low roar, filling the small space with rich, cold air. It was intoxicating to breathe it, but also terrifying. Roman prepared the lighter, taping it to keep the flame lit, positioned far enough away to give them a few minutes, but close enough to the leak to cause chaos when saturation reached critical point. "Noah, come here," Lívia called. The boy ran to them. Lívia had already removed the ventilation grate. The tunnel was dark, smelled of earth, and was terribly narrow. "You go first, honey. Hold the flashlight. Don't stop until you see snow." Noah entered the tunnel, crawling like a little soldier. Then it was Roman's turn. He looked at the tunnel, then at Lívia. "If I get stuck," he began. "I'll push you," she cut in. "Go." Roman entered the tunnel. It was agony. His shoulders scraped the concrete sides, and every crawling movement sent waves of pain through his injured abdomen. He grunted, stopping halfway, holding his breath. Lívia entered right behind him. The air in the basement was already getting heavy, saturated. Upstairs, they heard the unmistakable sound of the rug being dragged. "Found it," a muffled voice shouted above them. "There's a trapdoor." "Roman, move," Lívia whispered, pushing his feet. With a roar of effort, Roman forced his body forward, dragging himself inch by inch through the cold earth of the tunnel. Lívia crawled behind him, looking back one last time. The lighter flame danced in the darkness of the basement, a small blue star waiting to become a supernova. Above, the trapdoor wood creaked and opened. "They're down here," the intruder's voice shouted. Roman and Lívia were just 3 meters inside the tunnel when the light of the intruder's flashlights flooded the basement behind them. "Hey! What's that noise?" asked one of the men back there. "What's that smell?" Lívia held her breath and buried her face in the damp earth of the tunnel, covering her head with her arms. "Roman, cover your ears." In the basement, the oxygen concentration met the flame. There wasn't an immediate boom. There was a sound of violent suction, as if the air was being pulled into a vacuum, followed by a flash of white light that lit up the tunnel as if it were day. And then, the world exploded. The shockwave traveled through the narrow tunnel like a runaway train. Lívia felt the air forced out of her lungs when the pressure of the explosion hit her back, pushing her violently against Roman's boots. The earth above them shook, and a rain of dust and stones fell on their heads, threatening to bury them right there. The sound was muffled, deep, a vibration that shook bones more than ears. For a long and terrifying moment, there was only darkness and the sharp ringing in her ears. "Roman?" Lívia's voice came out as a strangled scream, muffled by dust. "Noah? I'm here." Roman's answer came from the front, hoarse and broken by dry coughs. He had absorbed most of the impact to protect Noah, using his broad body as a human shield within the confined space. "Keep going," Roman ordered, kicking the dirt to gain traction. The structure could give way at any moment. "We need to get out now." Lívia forced her limbs to move. They crawled the last few meters with the urgency of panic, scratching the frozen earth until the air changed. The smell of mold and explosives gave way to the sharp, pure winter air. Noah was the first out, falling into the soft snow behind the tool shed. Roman came next, exiting the hole with a grunt of pain, rolling onto his back in the snow to clear the path for Lívia. When Lívia emerged, pulling the freezing air into her burning lungs, she looked back. The clinic, her refuge, her workplace, was wounded. Black smoke billowed from the broken windows and the cracks in the ground floor. The basement explosion had caused the X-ray room floor to partially collapse, creating an internal crater that, with luck, had swallowed or at least disoriented the pursuers. But there was no time for mourning. "To the trees," Roman whispered, trying to stand up. He staggered, legs failing under his body weight and the injury aggravated by the effort in the tunnel. Lívia was at his side in a second, putting his arm over her shoulders. "Noah, hold Roman's hand on the other side. We'll drag him if we have to." The unlikely trio crossed the backyard, snow reaching Noah's knees. The wind howled, covering the sound of their steps and, fortunately, covering their tracks almost as fast as they made them. They reached the tree line, entering the dense protection of the pine forest. Only then, hidden by the wood's shadows, did Lívia allow them to stop. Roman slid down to the base of a large oak, breath coming in fast white clouds. He was as pale as the surrounding snow, eyes struggling to focus. Lívia knelt in front of him, hands going immediately to his face, checking temperature, pupil reaction. "You're going into shock," she said, voice trembling. "The cold, the pain, it's too much." Roman held her hands, stopping her from continuing the exam. He looked over her shoulder, through the trees, at the column of smoke rising from the clinic. "I destroyed everything," he murmured, guilt showing in his weak voice. "Your clinic. Your peaceful life. I brought war to your door and burned your sanctuary." Lívia looked back briefly, seeing flames licking the roof of the place where she tried to hide from the world. Then, she looked at Noah, who was huddled beside them, alive and safe. And finally looked at Roman. "Buildings can be rebuilt, Roman. Bricks and mortar don't have hearts." She squeezed his face between her hands, forcing him to look at her. "You didn't destroy my life. You saved this boy's life. And, in some strange way, I think you saved me too." "I dragged you to hell," he corrected. "No," Lívia smiled, a sad smile but full of tenderness. "You woke me up. I was sleeping, Roman. Hiding here, afraid to feel anything, afraid to fail. And then you walked through my door bleeding and demanding I be strong." She leaned in and rested her forehead on his, ignoring the cold, ignoring the danger, focusing only on the connection between them. "You made me remember who I am." Roman closed his eyes, absorbing her words as if they were the only medicine that worked. He released one hand and fumbled in the inner pocket of his torn coat. The radio, he remembered. The ranger cabin. 2 kilometers north. "Lívia. I can't make that walk. Not like this." "You can," she said firmly. "No," his voice was hard, final. "I am dead weight now. I'll slow you down. They will recover from the explosion. They'll come after us. If you go alone with Noah, you have a chance." He tried to push her lightly. "Go. Leave me here. I'll cover the rear if they show up. I have ammo for 2 more shots. It's enough to buy time." Lívia looked at him in disbelief. Even destroyed, even freezing in the snow, he was still trying to be the shield. The martyr. "You are unbelievable," she said, shaking her head. "Do you really think that after blowing up my clinic, crawling through a tunnel, and almost dying 3 times, I'm going to leave you leaning against a tree to turn into a popsicle or target practice?" She stood up and extended her hand to him. "The code of honor still applies out here in the woods, Roman. No one gets left behind." Roman looked at her outstretched hand. Small, but firm. A surgeon's hand that commanded life and death. "You are the most stubborn woman I've ever met," he grumbled, but accepted the hand. With a grunt of effort that echoed in the silent forest, he stood up. He swayed, dizzy, and Lívia immediately fit her body under his arm, supporting the weight. "Let's go," she said. "One step at a time. The cabin has a heater, radio, and if we're lucky, hot chocolate." Roman looked at her, leaning on her shoulder. "If we get lucky," he whispered in her ear, "we'll have a future." They turned north, entering the white darkness of the forest, leaving behind the smoking ruins of the past and walking painfully, but together, toward the only hope left. The forest was a maze of white and gray. The cutting wind turned the snow into ice needles that pricked exposed skin, and every step in the deep snow required monumental effort. For Lívia, the 2-kilometer walk felt like a transatlantic crossing. Roman's weight on her shoulders increased with every meter. He didn't complain, didn't make a sound, but she felt his body getting heavier, steps more dragging. His willpower was iron, but human biology had limits, and he was crossing all of them. "We're close," she lied, or maybe it was a prayer. "Noah, do you see anything?" The boy, walking ahead and breaking a path in the snow with a determination that belied his age, stopped and pointed. "A house. There." Lívia squinted against the wind. Through the dark trunks of the pines, a square silhouette stood out against the night sky. The ranger cabin. Dark, silent, and most importantly, whole. "Come on, Roman. Just a few more steps." They reached the rustic wooden porch. Lívia left Roman leaning against the outer wall, protected from the wind, while she tested the door. Locked. She looked around, desperate. "No key under the mat." "The window," Roman whispered, pointing with a trembling hand. Lívia went to the side window. With her elbow, she broke the glass with a sharp blow, unlocked the latch from inside, and pushed the window up. "Noah, climb in and open the door for us." The boy climbed over the sill and disappeared into the darkness. Seconds later, they heard the sound of the lock turning and the door opened. Entering the cabin was like entering a sanctuary. The air inside was freezing and smelled of old wood and dust, but it was still. No wind. No snow. Lívia helped Roman inside and guided him to an old leather sofa in front of a cold stone fireplace. He collapsed onto the seat, head falling back, teeth chattering in an uncontrollable rhythm. "Cold," he murmured, hugging his own body. Lívia knew what that meant. Blood loss combined with the external temperature had driven him to a dangerous stage of hypothermia. Blankets wouldn't be enough if he didn't have his own body heat to retain. "Noah, look for matches in the kitchen." "Anything to light a fire," she ordered, taking control. While the boy ran, Lívia knelt in front of Roman. She started taking off his wet coat, then his snow-soaked boots. "Lívia." He tried to hold her hands, but his fingers were rigid, uncoordinated. Let it be." "Don't you dare give up now, Roman Castellano," she scolded, voice choked. "We made it. You're not freezing now." Noah returned with a box of matches and some old newspapers. Lívia arranged the fireplace with impressive speed, stacking dry wood that was in a basket beside it. When the first flame caught, orange and alive, illuminating the rustic room, Lívia felt a wave of hope. But Roman still shook violently. Lívia looked at him. His skin was pale, almost bluish at the lips. The fire would take time to warm the room. He needed immediate heat. She made a decision. "Noah, take that fur rug and cover yourself near the fire. Stay nice and warm." The boy obeyed, curling up like a cocoon near the growing flames. Lívia turned to Roman. She took off her own damp coat and boots. Then, she climbed onto the narrow sofa. "What are you?" Roman tried to speak, confused. "Body heat," she said simply. "It's the fastest way to transfer temperature." She lay down beside him, pulling a thick wool blanket that was on the arm of the sofa to cover them both. She wrapped Roman with her arms and legs, pressing her body against his as much as possible, trying to donate every ounce of her own heat to him. Roman stiffened for a moment, shocked by the sudden intimacy, but then, instinctively, his body reacted. He turned to her, burying his face in the curve of her neck, seeking the warmth of her skin like a man dying of thirst seeks water. "You're warm," he sighed, the trembling starting to subside slightly as her heat penetrated his cold. Lívia caressed his back, feeling the scars under the thin shirt. "I'm here," she whispered against his hair. "I'm holding you." They stayed like that for a long time, while the fire crackled in the fireplace and the wind tried, unsuccessfully, to enter through the cracks. The silence of the cabin was deep and intimate. Roman raised his head slowly, dark eyes meeting hers in the orange gloom. Color was returning to his face, very slowly. "You should have left me in the woods," he said, voice low, laden with raw emotion. "I am a marked man, Lívia. Even if we survive tonight, I am danger. I am a trauma doctor, Roman. I deal with danger every day. I fix what is broken." She brought her hand to his face, tracing the strong line of his now warm jaw. "And I don't think you were broken. I think you were just alone in the cold for too long." Roman closed his eyes at her touch, an expression of pure devotion softening his hard features. "I was," he admitted. "Until you." He moved, closing the minimal distance between them. There was no sexual urgency, just a deep need for connection, to confirm they were alive. "Thank you," he whispered, grazing his lips on hers. "For not leaving me behind." "Never," Lívia promised, kissing him gently. They stayed embraced under the old blanket, two survivors warmed by the fire and the silent promise that, no matter how cold the night was, they wouldn't face it alone. In the corner of the room, the cabin's communication radio blinked a faint red light in the darkness, unnoticed. A hope. Or perhaps, a new danger. The first light of Christmas morning didn't come as a golden glow, but as a pale, cold gray filtered through the broken window of the cabin. Lívia woke slowly, emerging from a dreamless sleep, anchored by the comfortable weight of a strong arm around her waist. The fire in the fireplace had reduced to orange embers, but the heat under the wool blanket was still intense. She opened her eyes and found Roman awake, watching her. In the raw light of day, he looked exhausted. Stubble darkened his jaw, and there were deep shadows under his eyes. But the fever that made his skin burn the night before seemed to have subsided. His heat was now human, constant, no longer that dangerous fire of infection. "Merry Christmas, Doctor," he whispered, voice hoarse from disuse and the smoke they inhaled. Lívia blinked, remembering where they were and what day it was. "Merry Christmas, Roman." She moved slightly to check his temperature with the back of her hand on his forehead and neck. "The fever broke. Your body fought bravely." Roman held her hand that was on his face and kissed the palm. "I had a good reason to fight." In the corner of the room, under the fur rug, Noah stirred and yawned, waking up. The boy sat up, rubbing his eyes, and looked around the unknown cabin until his eyes landed on Lívia and Roman on the sofa. He smiled, that innocent smile that made all the danger worthwhile. "Did Santa find us here?" asked Noah. Roman smiled, sitting up carefully, a quick grimace of pain crossing his face. "I think he was busy, kid. But we got the best gift, we're alive." It was then that a static sound cut the silent air of the cabin. Hiss. Beep. Hiss. Lívia stood up quickly, adjusting her wrinkled coat. "The radio," she said. "I saw the light last night, but I was too focused on you." She ran to the corner table where the old communication equipment was installed. It was a shortwave radio, used by rangers to coordinate rescues and monitor fires. The red battery light was on, but dim. "Don't touch the transmitter yet," warned Roman, standing up with difficulty and limping to her. "If they are scanning frequencies, they'll triangulate our position the moment we press the talk button." He stopped beside her, leaning a hand on the table for balance. He turned the volume dial slowly. The hiss increased. Distant, cut-off voices emerged amidst the static. Sector 4 clear, nothing on the main road. The voice was metallic and cold. Lívia felt a shiver. It was them. The invaders. They survived the explosion, she whispered, looking at Roman. Most must have stayed outside, analyzed Roman, face hardening. They are doing a fan sweep. They are looking for footprints in the snow. Found tracks heading north. The voice on the radio said suddenly. 3 targets. 1 wounded, dragging steps. Heading towards the lookout tower. Lívia looked at the broken window. They know. They're coming. Roman looked at the radio, calculating. How much time do we have until they get here on foot? He asked. In deep snow? Maybe 30 minutes, estimated Lívia. Less if they have snowmobiles. Roman looked at the radio panel. There was a list of frequencies taped to the wall above the table: fire department, state police, air emergency. We need to call heavy cavalry, Roman said. Local police will take too long to get up the mountain with the roads blocked. We need air rescue. He adjusted the dial to the air emergency frequency. Lívia, listen. I'm going to make a short transmission. I'll give the coordinates and sign off. They will hear, he pointed to the radio, referring to the pursuers, but they won't have time to triangulate the exact position, only the general direction. This will turn the next 20 minutes into a race. A race you can't win running, said Lívia, looking at his injury. Then we'll have to win by being smart, he replied. Noah, come here. I need you to watch the window. If you see anything dark moving in the white snow, you shout. The boy ran to the improvised lookout post. Roman grabbed the radio microphone. He took a deep breath, gathered all the authority he possessed, and pressed the side button. Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is Dr. Lívia Marchetti. I have a wounded officer and a civilian child under protective custody. Coordinates: North Ranger Cabin, Pinewood Sector. Code Red. I repeat, Code Red. Armed invaders in pursuit. Request immediate extraction. He released the button immediately and unplugged the device from the wall. The silence that followed was deafening. Lívia looked at him, surprised. Wounded officer? She repeated. Since when are you an officer, Roman? Roman gave a half-smile, tired but charming. Technically, I made a cooperation deal before running with Noah. On paper, I'm a federal protected witness. But wounded officer makes the helicopter come faster. Lívia shook her head, amazed by his audacity. You lie very naturally. I do whatever it takes, he said, holding her face. The helicopter will take about 20 minutes if it's at the nearby base. The men outside could arrive in 10. He went to the wall where there was a locked glass cabinet. With his elbow, he broke the glass and removed an old flare gun and a box of ammo. What are we going to do? Asked Lívia, feeling adrenaline rushing back into her veins, chasing away the morning calm. Roman handed the flare gun to her. It was orange, heavy, and made of thick plastic. When you hear the sound of helicopter blades, you fire this upwards. It will guide them straight to us. And until then? She asked. Roman looked at the cabin door, then at the dense forest outside. Until then, Doctor, we turn this cabin into a fortress. No one enters here uninvited. Aunt Lívia, shouted Noah from the window. There are people in the woods. Roman and Lívia ran to look. In the distance, between the dark tree trunks, figures dressed in winter camouflage advanced methodically through the snow. They didn't have 30 minutes. They had 5. Roman took the pistol he had managed to recover before leaving the clinic. He checked the magazine. 2 bullets. He looked at Lívia. Remember when I said I would protect you until my last breath? Don't say that like it's a goodbye, warned Lívia, holding his arm. It's not a goodbye, said Roman, eyes burning with a fierce promise. It's a guarantee. Get ready, Lívia. Christmas isn't over yet. 5 minutes. It was all they had, and time slipped like sand through fingers. Inside the cabin, the silence of Christmas morning was replaced by the frantic sound of furniture being dragged. Roman, ignoring the stabbing pain in his abdomen, knocked over the massive oak dining table, pushing it against the front door. This won't hold bullets, he warned, cold sweat covering his forehead again. But it will stop them from rushing in. It will force them to stop on the porch. Lívia ran to the stone fireplace. The fire was low now. There was a side niche, used to store wood, protected by the thick chimney stones. Noah, here, she called, voice steady but heart racing. Get in there. Tuck your knees. The boy obeyed, eyes wide with fear, but trusting her blindly. I'm going to cover you with this fur rug, said Lívia, settling the boy in the tight, safe space. Promise me one thing, Noah. No matter what you hear, loud noises, screams, breaking wood, you do not come out of there. You count to 1,000. Very slowly. And Uncle Roman, whispered the boy. Uncle Roman is going to do what he does best, be stubborn. Lívia kissed his forehead and covered the hiding spot with the heavy rug and some logs, making it invisible. She turned around. Roman was positioned near the broken window, peeking through a crack in the curtain. He held the pistol with both hands to steady the shaking. 2 bullets. 5 enemies outside. The math of death was not in their favor. They're getting into position, informed Roman, without looking back. 2 flanking left, 2 right. The leader is coming down the center. They want to surround us so we have no escape route. Lívia grabbed the orange flare gun. She looked at the ceiling, then at Roman. Where do I stand? Behind the old fridge in the kitchen, instructed Roman. It's the only metal thing in here besides the stove. Stay down, Lívia. Only get up to fire the flare when you hear the helicopter. Roman. She hesitated. Go, he shouted, the moment the first shot shattered the remaining window glass. The bullet whizzed through the room and buried itself in the opposite wall, kicking up a cloud of wood splinters. The attack began. It wasn't a movie shootout. It was a brutal siege. Bullets began to tear through the cabin's wooden walls as if they were paper. The sound was deafening, a mix of dry cracks and splitting wood. Plates fell from shelves, glass exploded. Lívia shrank behind the fridge, covering her head, feeling paralyzing terror try to dominate her. But then she looked at Roman. He was crouched behind the overturned table. He wasn't shooting back. He was waiting. With only 2 bullets, he couldn't afford to miss or shoot to scare. He needed a clean target. The shooting ceased suddenly. Castellano, a voice shouted from outside. It was the same voice from the radio. Cold, arrogant. We know you're wounded. We know you're out of ammo. Hand over the boy and the doctor can walk out alive. Roman looked at Lívia across the destroyed room. His eyes met hers. Lie, his eyes said. They won't leave anyone alive. Roman took a deep breath and shouted back, his voice surprisingly strong. The doctor already called air rescue. Coordinates were sent. You have 3 minutes before a SWAT team drops here and turns you into sieves. There was silence outside. Doubt. Was Roman bluffing or telling the truth? He's lying, shouted another voice outside. Break down the door. Heavy steps ran across the wooden porch. Roman's body tensed. He raised the gun, aiming at the wood of the barricaded door. He waited until he saw the first man's shadow project against the crack. Bam! Roman fired. A scream of pain from the other side of the door, followed by the sound of a body falling. "One bullet," whispered Roman to himself. "One left." The invader's response was furious. A burst of gunfire swept the front of the cabin, forcing Roman to hit the floor. Bullets ricocheted off the oak table, creating a rain of splinters. Lívia saw blood starting to stain Roman's dressing again. He was at the limit. If they invaded now, it would be over. She looked around, desperate for any advantage. Her eyes fell on the kitchen window, just above where she was hiding. Through the dirty glass, she saw something outside, leaning against the cabin wall, near where the attackers were grouped to reload. The external propane tank. The gas supply for the stove and heater. It was a large tank, white and rusty. And it was a few meters from where the men were taking cover. Lívia looked at the flare gun in her hands. It was made to fire upwards, to shine and call for help. But it was, essentially, a weapon that fired a magnesium ball burning at extremely high temperatures. If she fired at the sky now, the helicopter, if it was coming, would see. But Roman would be dead before rescue landed. If she used the flare as a weapon, she would lose the rescue signal. It was an impossible choice. The hope of rescue versus immediate survival. Roman looked at her, seeing the direction of her gaze. He saw the tank. Saw the rifle in her hand. He shook his head negatively. "No," he mouthed without sound. "Save it for the signal. Save Noah." The front door shook with a violent kick. The barricade table slid a few inches. They were getting in. Lívia looked at Roman, the man who made her feel alive again, the man willing to die with a bullet in the chamber to protect her. She made her decision. "Screw the signal," she whispered. Lívia stood up from behind the fridge, ignoring the danger. She aimed the orange flare gun through the kitchen window, aiming not at the sky, but at the propane tank outside. "Roman, get down," she screamed. The moment the invaders kicked the front door, opening a breach, Lívia pulled the trigger. The flare gun kicked in her hand. A bright red projectile, hissing like a miniature meteor, smashed through the window glass and flew toward the gas tank. There was a second of absolute silence. And then, Christmas morning turned into fire. The world went white, then orange, and then plunged into a sharp, painful ringing. The propane tank explosion wasn't just fire, it was a physical shockwave that ripped the side wall off the cabin as if it were made of toothpicks. Lívia was thrown backward, sliding across the kitchen floor until she hit the lower cabinets. Pieces of wood, glass, and snow flew into the room in a chaotic vortex. The roof groaned, protesting the loss of support, but miraculously, the main structure held. Lívia coughed, shaking dust from her hair. Her ears rang so loud she couldn't hear her own breathing. She looked frantically at the fireplace. The stones were intact. Noah's hiding spot had resisted. "Roman," she shouted, but didn't hear her own voice. She crawled across the debris-covered floor to the main room. The barricade table was overturned. The front door no longer existed, there was just a smoking hole where the entrance used to be. Outside, on the soot-blackened snow, there was no movement. The main attack had been neutralized by the brute force of the explosion. Lívia saw Roman. He was lying near the sofa, covered in sawdust and splinters. He was trying to get up, supporting himself on one elbow, the gun still gripped in his right hand like an extension of his body. She ran to him, holding his face. He blinked, trying to focus on her. He was alive. But the nightmare wasn't over. A shadow appeared in the smoke, entering through the hole in the destroyed wall. A man stumbled into the cabin. It was the mercenary leader. He was injured by the explosion, face bleeding and uniform scorched, but rage kept him standing. In his hand, an automatic pistol swayed, looking for a target. Lívia froze. She was kneeling beside Roman, totally exposed. The mercenary saw Lívia. A cruel, bloody smile formed on his lips. He raised the gun, aiming directly at her chest. "Doctor," he growled, fingers squeezing the trigger. There was no time to run. No time to scream. Lívia closed her eyes, waiting for impact. Bang! A single shot echoed in the destroyed cabin. Dry. Definitive. But Lívia felt no pain. She opened her eyes. The mercenary stood still, a frozen expression of surprise on his face. A small red hole appeared in the center of his chest. The gun fell from his hand, followed by his knees giving way. He tipped forward, falling motionless onto the kitchen rubble. Lívia looked down. Roman had his arm extended, smoke coming from the barrel of his pistol. He had used his last bullet. His hand trembled violently now that the shot had been fired, and the gun slipped from his fingers, hitting the wooden floor. "I said," Roman whispered, voice almost inaudible, a trickle of blood running from the corner of his mouth. "Nobody touches you." And then, his eyes rolled back. The arm that protected her until the end fell lifelessly beside his body. Roman passed out. "Roman!" "No, no, no!" Lívia shouted, medical panic replacing fear. She pressed her fingers to his neck. The pulse was there, but it was weak, thready. He was in severe hypovolemic shock. The final effort, the explosion, the loss of blood, his body had reached the absolute limit. "Stay with me," she begged, pressing her hands over his wound to stop the bleeding that had restarted with force. "You can't die now. We won. Roman." It was then that she heard it. First, it was a vibration in the broken glass still remaining in the frames. Then, a rhythmic, deep, powerful sound cutting the mountain wind. Thump, 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 thump. The sound of rotors. Lívia looked at the sky through the partially destroyed roof. A red and white rescue helicopter appeared over the tree line, kicking up a cloud of snow around the cabin. On the fuselage, the insignia of air rescue and trauma. Men rappelled down ropes before the helicopter even landed, weapons drawn, sweeping the area with military efficiency. "Area clear," shouted one of the rescuers, entering the destroyed cabin. He saw Lívia kneeling over Roman, her hands covered in blood, tears running down her soot-stained face. "Dr. Marchetti?" asked the rescuer. "He needs plasma," Lívia shouted, her command voice returning with ferocity. Gunshot wound in the abdomen, class 4 shock, hypothermia. "Bring the stretcher now." 2 paramedics ran inside with equipment. Lívia didn't leave Roman's side while they stabilized him. She shouted orders, dictating dosages, refusing to let go of his hand. Only when they put him on the stretcher and started running to the helicopter did Lívia remember. "Noah," she turned to the fireplace. She ran to the stones and pulled away the logs and fur rug. The boy was there, curled in fetal position, hands over his ears, counting quietly as she asked. 701, 702. "Noah." Lívia pulled him into her arms, hugging him tight. "It's over, honey. It's over." The boy looked at her, then at the destroyed cabin, and finally at the medical team taking Roman away. "Uncle Roman?" he asked, voice trembling. Lívia looked at the stretcher being hoisted into the helicopter. Roman was motionless, pale as death. But she knew the strength of that heart. "He is fighting, Noah," she said, picking the boy up and running toward the rescue. And we are going to fight with him. They climbed into the helicopter. The doors closed, muffling the howl of the wind and smell of smoke. While the aircraft climbed, leaving behind the smoking ruin in the snow, Lívia held Roman's cold hand and looked at the heart monitor. A green line, weak but persistent, continued to beep. The war was over. The battle for his life was just beginning. The interior of the helicopter was a world of noise and vibration. The beat of the blades cut the air, but for Lívia, the only sound that mattered was the sharp, continuous alarm coming from the heart monitor. "We're losing pressure," shouted the flight paramedic, struggling to find a vein in Roman's collapsed arm. "Systolic dropping to 60. He's going into arrest." Lívia looked at the monitor. The green line, which previously drew weak peaks, now flickered erratically. Ventricular fibrillation. Roman's heart, exhausted by blood loss and trauma, was giving up. Fear tried to paralyze Lívia's hands, but medical training screamed louder. She wasn't the woman in love now, she was the trauma surgeon. "Charge the defibrillator." 200 joules, she ordered, voice cutting through the intercom chaos. "Doctor, protocol says." Began the paramedic. "Forget protocol." Lívia unbuttoned what was left of Roman's shirt, exposing the chest marked by scars and now covered in electrodes. "This man took an explosion and a bullet to save 2 lives today. His heart is strong. He just needs a push. Charge." The high-pitched whine of the defibrillator filled the cabin. Lívia looked at Roman's pale face. He seemed to be sleeping, far from pain, far from her. "Don't you dare," she whispered, leaning over him. "You promised, Roman. You said you would be with me." "Charged," shouted the paramedic. "Clear." Lívia took her hands off his body. Thump. Roman's body arched with the electric shock, then fell inert on the stretcher. All eyes turned to the monitor. A flat line. Static silence. "No rhythm," said the paramedic. "Starting compressions." "No," Lívia pushed his hands aside. "Let me do it." She climbed onto the side of the stretcher, positioning her hands in the center of his chest. And began to pump. 1, 2, 3, 4. She imposed her own rhythm on his stopped heart. Each compression was an order, a plea, a transfer of energy. "You aren't going to die. Not today. Not on Christmas. Not after making me feel alive again. Roman, come back," she screamed, ignoring the tears wetting her oxygen mask. "Come back to me." "Doctor, it's been 2 minutes," warned the pilot over the radio. "We are landing at the General Hospital helipad in 30 seconds. Lívia didn't stop. Her arms burned, but she continued. "Charge again," she ordered between compressions. 300 joules. Now. Clear. Shock. His body jumped again. Lívia looked at the monitor, holding her breath until her lungs hurt. The flat line wavered. A peak. A long, terrifying pause. Another peak. Beep. 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 A sinus rhythm. Weak, fast, but present. Lívia let out the air in a sob, falling seated onto the helicopter bench, holding his frozen hand against her face. "Stubborn," she whispered, kissing his fingers. "You stubborn, wonderful idiot." The helicopter touched ground with a jolt. The doors opened and the cold city air invaded the cabin, mixed with the smell of kerosene. A trauma team waited on the helipad, blue scrubs flapping in the wind. "What do we have?" shouted the chief surgeon, running alongside the stretcher as Roman was lowered. "Male, 34 years old, gunshot wound in lower right quadrant, contained evisceration," severe hypothermia, recovered post-cardiac arrest. Lívia recited the report with mechanical precision as she ran beside the stretcher, holding the 4-bag. "Great job, doctor," said the surgeon, recognizing her despite the soot on her face. "We take it from here." They reached the double doors of the surgery center. The red line on the floor marked the limit. The stretcher passed. Lívia tried to follow, but a nurse gently blocked her path. "Dr. Marchetti." "Lívia," said the nurse. "You know the rules. You are family now. You can't operate." Lívia stopped. Her hands, still dirty with blood and cabin dust, hovered in the air, empty. She saw Roman disappear through the automatic doors, surrounded by strangers who now held his life in their hands. For the first time in 24 hours, she wasn't in control. She felt a tug on the hem of her dirty coat. She looked down. Noah was there, holding a silver thermal blanket around his shoulders, big scared eyes fixed on her. A hospital social worker was right behind him. "Did Uncle Roman go to get fixed?" asked the boy. Lívia crouched, ignoring the pain in her own knees and ringing in her ears. She hugged the boy, feeling he was the only solid thing in a world spinning too fast. "Yes, Noah," she said, voice trembling. "He went to get fixed. And he is the strongest person I know." She stood up, took the boy's hand, and walked to the waiting room. The fluorescent hospital light seemed too bright, too artificial compared to the cabin fireplace. Lívia sat in a hard plastic chair, pulling Noah onto her lap. She looked at the clock on the wall. Now, the hardest part began. Not the fight against armed men or explosions, but the silent, agonizing wait to know if the love she found in the storm would survive the calm. Time in a hospital waiting room is not measured in minutes or hours. It is measured in heartbeats, in cups of cold coffee, and in staring at double doors that refuse to open. Lívia had been sitting in the same position for 4 hours. Noah had fallen asleep in her lap, exhausted by the day's trauma, holding her hand as if it were his anchor to the world. She watched nurses pass, clean, efficient, calm. They looked at Lívia with curiosity, a woman wearing a scorched medical coat, face stained with soot and dried blood, hugging a child in a plastic chair. Lívia knew she looked like a war survivor. And, in a way, she was. Firm steps echoed in the hallway. Not a doctor's steps. Lívia raised her head. A man in a gray suit, with the rigid posture of someone carrying a badge, stopped in front of her. "Dr. Marchetti?" he asked. Lívia straightened her posture, protective instinct igniting instantly. She squeezed Noah a little tighter. "Who wants to know?" "Agent Miller, FBI," he said, showing identification quickly and discreetly. "I am here for Mr. Castellano." "And for the boy." Lívia's heart skipped a beat. Roman had mentioned a deal, protection. But after the carnage at the cabin, she feared he would be treated as just another criminal. "He's in surgery," Lívia said, voice cold and cutting. "He saved this boy's life. He helped take down an entire mercenary cell. If you are here to handcuff him to a hospital bed, you'll have to go through me." Agent Miller looked at her, then at the sleeping boy, and his severe expression softened slightly. "I am not here to arrest him, doctor. Roman fulfilled his part of the deal. The information he gave us, combined with the incident at the cabin, gave us everything we needed to arrest the organization's leadership this morning." The agent sighed, looking at the surgery center doors. "He told us he wouldn't survive tonight. His plan was to hand the boy to us and serve as bait for you to escape. He didn't expect to leave that mountain alive." Lívia felt tears prick her eyes again. The damn martyr. He had planned to die to save them from the moment he walked into the clinic. "He underestimated 2 things," said Lívia, wiping a tear with the back of her dirty hand. His stubbornness. And mine. At that moment, the double doors opened. The chief surgeon came out, taking off his surgical cap, looking tired. He saw the FBI agent, but walked straight to Lívia. Lívia stood up slowly, trying not to wake Noah, heart in her throat. "Doctor," called the surgeon. "Tell me," asked Lívia. "Just one word." The surgeon smiled. A tired, but genuine smile. "He is strong. Internal damage was extensive, lost a lot of blood, and we had to repair the liver and intestine. But the heart held. He is stable. We are moving him to ICU now." Lívia let out the air she seemed to have been holding since the helicopter. Her legs went weak, and she had to lean on the wall. "Can I see him?" "He is still under anesthesia, but..." The surgeon looked at her state. "I think he'll need to hear your voice to decide to come back. Go. The nurse will stay with the boy." Lívia kissed Noah's forehead, who was gently supported by a pediatric nurse, and ran to the sterile area. She washed her hands and face in the hallway sink, scrubbing soot and blood until her skin was red. She needed to be clean for him. Needed to be Dr. Marchetti again, not the explosion victim. When she entered the ICU room, the rhythmic, constant sound of the heart monitor was the most beautiful music she had ever heard. Beep. 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 Roman lay in bed, pale against the white sheets, surrounded by tubes and wires. He looked smaller lying there, without the armor of heavy coats and without the tension of combat. He looked just like a man. Lívia pulled up a chair and sat beside the bed. She took his hand, the large, calloused hand, knuckles scuffed from fighting. It was warm. Alive. "Hey," she whispered, throat closed. "You made it. You beat the storm, Roman." She stayed there for hours, watching his chest rise and fall. The sun began to set outside, painting the city's sky purple and orange, a peaceful contrast to the night before. It was a slight squeeze on her fingers that made her jump. Lívia looked at his face. Roman's eyelids fluttered. He frowned, as if fighting an immense weight to wake up. "Roman," she called. "I'm here. Open your eyes." Slowly, with visible effort, he obeyed. Dark eyes opened, unfocused at first, wandering the sterile white ceiling. Then, they found her face. Recognition was instantaneous. Confusion disappeared, replaced by deep relief. He tried to speak, but his throat was dry from the breathing tube they had just removed. He coughed weakly. Lívia grabbed a cup of water with a straw and helped him drink a small sip. Slowly, she instructed, the doctor in her taking control, but the woman in her trembling. Roman pushed the straw away. He looked at her, his eyes scanning every inch of her face, checking if she was real, if she was whole. "You." His voice was a hoarse whisper, almost inaudible. "You stayed." "I said partners don't abandon anyone," Lívia replied, smiling through tears now running freely. "And you owe me a new office." Mine blew up. Roman tried to laugh, but it came out as a groan of pain. He squeezed her hand weakly. "The boy? Safe. The FBI is here. They caught the bad guys, Roman. It's over. Noah is going to have a normal life." Roman closed his eyes for a moment, absorbing the news. The tension he carried in his shoulders, that eternal bodyguard posture, finally dissolved into the hospital sheets. He opened his eyes again and focused on Lívia with an intensity that made her heart race. "And you?" he asked. "Are you going back to your safe life now? Run away again?" Lívia leaned over the bed, resting her elbows on the mattress, face to face with him. "I spent years running from fear, Roman. running from the responsibility of having someone's life in my hands because I was afraid to fail. But last night I held your life. And I didn't fail. She brushed her lips on his forehead, feeling the feverish heat gone, replaced by the temperature of life. I'm not going anywhere. Unless it's wherever you go. Roman released her hand only to bring his fingers to her face, tracing the outline of her lips. Then I better recover fast, doctor, he whispered, eyes shining with the promise of a future. Because I have a lot to show you outside that cabin. Lívia smiled and, for the first time in a long time, felt no cold. Felt no fear. She felt only the absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was supposed to be, holding the hand of the man who walked through hell in the snow just to fall into her arms. 1 year later. Snow fell gently over Chicago, turning steel and glass skyscrapers into crystal towers under the city lights. Unlike that night at the rural clinic, this snow wasn't a threat. It was decoration. Dr. Lívia Marchetti walked out the automatic doors of Memorial Hospital, breathing the icy Christmas Eve air. She pulled her wool scarf tighter around her neck. The shift had been long. She had performed 3 trauma surgeries in 12 hours. But her hands didn't shake. Not a bit. She walked down the busy sidewalk, where rushing people carried gift bags and laughed. Lívia smiled to herself. A year ago, she was alone, hiding, and broken. Today, she was chief of trauma, respected, feared by residents, and most importantly, whole. A sleek black car was parked at the curb, engine running silently, venting steam from the exhaust. Lívia stopped. Her heart gave that familiar leap, the same leap it gave the first time she saw that man walk through her door in a storm. Roman was leaning against the passenger door. He no longer wore torn or soot-stained clothes. He wore a dark wool overcoat over a perfectly tailored suit. He looked dangerous, yes, that aura of power would never leave him, but now it was controlled, civilized danger. He saw her approach and pushed off the car. The movement was fluid, with no sign of the pain that almost killed him a year earlier. Only someone looking very closely would notice the subtle stiffness when he turned his torso, a permanent reminder of the bullet and surgery. Dr. Marchetti, he greeted, his deep voice warming the cold air between them. Shift over? The shift never ends, Mr. Castellano, she teased, stopping in front of him. But for Christmas, I make an exception. Roman smiled, and the lines around his eyes softened the hard expression of his face. He reached out, the hand that now wore a simple white gold band, and touched her face with his leather glove. You look tired. Save many lives today? A few, Lívia leaned into his touch. But none as stubborn as yours. Impossible, he agreed. I am a unique case. The rear window of the car opened with an electric hum. A small face, flushed from the car heater, appeared. Aunt Lívia, shouted Noah, waving frantically. Uncle Roman said if you took any longer, we were going to eat the turkey without you. Lívia laughed, the sound echoing clear and happy in the night. Noah was bigger, healthier, cheeks full of life. There was no more fear in his eyes. He was in school now, drawing his superheroes and living the childhood Roman had fought so hard to give him. Tell your uncle if he eats without me, he's going to need another surgery, Lívia threatened, winking at the boy. Roman opened the car door for her, but before she got in, he held her by the waist, pulling her close. In the middle of the busy sidewalk, under falling snow, the world stopped. Thank you, he whispered, dark eyes fixed on hers. For what? She asked. For not running. For stitching me up. For loving me when I had nothing to offer but trouble. Lívia placed her hands on his chest, feeling the strong, rhythmic beat of his heart under the heavy coat. That heart she had restarted with her own hands. That heart that now beat for her. You gave me courage, Roman. you taught me that the code of honor isn't about following rules. It's about protecting who we love, no matter the cost. He leaned in and kissed her. It was a deep, slow kiss, tasting of snow and fulfilled promises. It wasn't a desperate kiss of survival like in the cabin, nor a feverish farewell kiss. It was the kiss of a man who knew exactly where his home was. When they parted, Roman rested his forehead on hers. "Let's go home, Lívia. Noah is waiting for presents." "And you?" she asked. "What do you want for Christmas?" Roman looked at her, then at the laughing boy in the back seat, and finally at the lit-up city around them. He, the ex-enforcer, the man who lived in shadows, was now in the light. "I already have everything," he said. "I have my life. I have my boy. And I have the doctor who holds my heart in her hands." Lívia smiled, getting into the warm, safe car. Roman closed the door, protecting her from the cold, and walked around to take the wheel. As the car drove away into the white Christmas night, Lívia looked out the window. The storm had passed. The past was healed. And the future was an open road, bright and full of life. The end.